Philosophers are concerned with questions of immense importance, such as, is it wrong to lie? What promotes human happiness? What is knowledge? Do religious beliefs require justification? And what is a law of nature? The types of questions that scientific methods such as empirical observation, testing, and statistical analysis are simply not equipped to answer by themselves. But if scientific tools and methods alone are not suitable for answering philosophical questions, this naturally leads one to wonder what tools and methods are. In this video, I briefly introduce one method and one tool that are crucial for philosophical inquiry: critical thinking and logic. Vaughn defines critical thinking as the systematic evaluation or formulation of beliefs or statements by rational standards. Critical thinking is thus concerned with carefully considering and scrutinizing the reasons we have for holding our beliefs. To better understand this, let's briefly explore a distinction that we shall revisit again when we discuss epistemology, the field of philosophy that is concerned with knowledge. Many philosophers distinguish between two types of beliefs: basic beliefs and based beliefs. Roughly, a basic belief is one that can be rationally held apart from supporting arguments or inferences. A classic example of a basic belief is a perceptual belief, like my belief that my daughter is sitting across from me as I write the script for this video. I hold this belief because I am directly perceiving her sitting across from me as I type these words, not because I was persuaded to believe this by some argument or set of evidence. Our basic beliefs are not formed or mediated through some inferential process, but rather they are immediately perceived to be true. In other words, we don't typically engage in critical thinking to form our basic beliefs. Rather, we believe them because they seem or appear to be true. You may be wondering if there are any rational standards that can help us to determine whether or not we are warranted in holding our basic beliefs to be true. Well, there are a variety of opinions about this. Some common things that philosophers take into consideration when trying to determine if it is rational to take our basic beliefs to be true are the processes that produce the belief and the conditions in which the belief was formed. For example, we might ask whether or not our cognitive faculties were functioning properly when the belief was formed, or whether or not we formed the belief in an environment that was conducive to coming to know the truth. We ask these questions to determine whether or not we are rational or warranted in holding a basic belief to be true. We shall explore this topic in greater detail in a later episode. For now, let's turn our attention to based beliefs. Based beliefs are the primary focus of critical thinking. Unlike a basic belief, a based belief is one that is formed on the basis of arguments or inferences. Now, in this context, an argument is not a vicious screaming match or an act of violence. Rather, an argument or an inference is a group of statements organized in a particular way. As Patrick Hurley explains, an argument is a group of statements, one or more of which, the premises, are claimed to provide support for or reasons to believe one of the others, the conclusion. Critical thinking is primarily an activity in which we A, formulate arguments in order to justify a based belief, or B, evaluate arguments that have been put forth in order to justify a based belief. Now, obviously, philosophers aren't the only ones engaging in critical thinking. Scientists, for example, utilize empirical observation and testing to justify base beliefs about how physical objects will behave under certain conditions, or to accurately describe various biological processes like photosynthesis, to cite but two examples. But philosophers attempt to justify based beliefs that scientific methods alone are not equipped to justify. An example of such a question that we considered at the opening of the lecture is, what promotes human happiness? One possible response to this question is that pleasure promotes human happiness. But one may wonder if this response to the question is true. Can pleasure promote human happiness? The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle answered this question with a resounding no. Pleasure cannot promote human happiness. But he didn't simply assert that pleasure cannot promote human happiness. He engaged in critical thinking. He attempted to justify his belief that pleasure cannot promote human happiness with an argument. On the basis of his sophisticated and nuanced theory about the different categories of being and the different types of explanations we can appeal to, Aristotle believed that only a unique activity characteristic of human beings could promote human happiness. And since pleasure is a passive state, common to many non-human animals, and not a unique human activity, he maintained that pleasure could not possibly promote human happiness. We can formally represent this argument as follows. Premise 1. Only a unique activity, characteristic of human beings, can promote human happiness. Premise 2. Pleasure is not a unique activity characteristic of human beings, for pleasure is a passive state, common to many non-human animals. Conclusion. Therefore, pleasure cannot promote human happiness. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time to closely evaluate Aristotle's argument right now. That is to say, we don't have time to discuss whether or not the premises of his argument are true. That would distract us from the topic at hand, which is critical thinking. The important thing to note at present is that Aristotle doesn't simply make the unfounded assertion that pleasure cannot promote human happiness. Rather, he has reasons for believing that this is true. In this case, his reasons are expressed in Premise 1 and Premise 2, which are intended to provide rational support for or justification for the conclusion that pleasure cannot promote human happiness. The rational standards by which we evaluate arguments like Aristotle's are called the formal rules of reasoning, otherwise known as logic. Patrick Hurley more precisely defines logic as the organized body of knowledge or science that evaluates arguments or inferences. Logic studies the various different types of arguments or patterns of reasoning that we use to justify our based beliefs. There are a host of different types of inferences one might use to lend support to a conclusion, including inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, and abductive reasoning. Logic studies the formal structure of these arguments, of these patterns of reasoning or inferences, to determine when they are valid or invalid or cogent or uncogent. Logic's a powerful tool. It helps us to clearly distinguish between the claim we are making, the conclusion, and the evidence we are using to support that claim, the premises. It helps us to organize and clearly express our reasoning in a standard form. Recall how I presented Aristotle's argument, how its premises were clearly identified and placed above the conclusion. Importantly, logic also provides us with an objective means to test arguments, to find out if the premises do in fact support the conclusion, i.e. to tell us if an argument is valid or invalid, or cogent or uncogent. Contrary to what some people might think, it isn't the case that philosophers simply respond to philosophical questions by expressing their feelings or by passionately and cleverly asserting unfounded opinions. Rather, they are keen to ensure that the beliefs we hold are rational. Hence, they arrive at answers to philosophical questions by engaging in critical thinking, by developing good arguments. And to ensure the arguments that they formulate are good, they utilize logic. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you wish to see more great philosophical content. And if you're feeling particularly generous, you might consider sharing this video on your favorite social media platform.